And welcome back. Again, this is the Catholic Lady, and we're reading Great Line of God by Taylor Caldwell. We're at the beginning of chapter 34, and this is following Saul's vision in the desert when he encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. It opens with a reading from Acts 9, verse 10 through 17. There was a certain disciple at Damascus named Ananias, and to him said the Lord in a vision, Ananias. And he said, Behold, I am here, Lord. And the Lord said to him, Arise and go into the street which is called Straight, and inquire in the house of Judas for one called Saul of Tarshish. For behold, he prays, and he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias coming in and putting his hand on him, that he might receive his sight. Then Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard by many of this man how much evil he has done to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all that call on your name. But the Lord said unto him, Go your way, for he is a chosen vessel unto me, to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the children of Israel. For I will show him how great things he must suffer for my name's sake. And Ananias went his way. Judas ben Jonah was in a dilemma. He was a rich and respected resident of the ancient city of Damascus, a man of some 48 years, grave, circumspect, dignified, and courteous, a banker and a merchant. His family was old and revered. He had married a lady of distinction and piety, and his sons had married similar women. His daughters had not disgraced him in their marriages. He would say with modesty that there was not a city of note in the world in which he did not have a devoted friend, and he had a round, innocent brown eyes that saw everything and underestimated no enemy, nor overestimated any acquaintance, or even a member of his own household. His beard was rich and brown, and carefully tended, and only slightly fragrant, and he moved sedately. This was partly a matter of flesh, and partly a matter of temperament. His large house on the street called Straight was most comfortable, though not luxurious. Nor were its appointments ostentatious. He would often say in his soft, deep voice that God had been good to him, blessed be his name. And he was heralded for his alms and his tithes, and that he paid to the temple, and his journeys to Jerusalem on the high holy days, and his devotion. His whole life had always been in accordance with the law and the commandments, and he found no tediousness in it. His counsel was invariably wise, if dull. He would say that a man who considered life precarious and capricious was a man who had not ordered his own life well, and he suspected excitement, enthusiasms, and wonder. He was a friend not only of Pontius Pilate and Caiaphas, the high priest, but of Shabuah ben Abraham. Shabuah valued his friendship, and Saul ben Hillel had met him on few occasions in his grandfather's house. And if the young man had discovered him to be a man of formal and uninspired convictions, he had come to respect him. So Saul had announced to Pilate that he would live at the house of Judas ben Jonah while on his mission to Damascus, and Judas had extended him a cordial, if prudent, invitation, not at first understanding to the full. Now he understood, hence his dilemma, for Judas ben Jonah had become a follower of Yeshua ben Joseph of Nazareth, not with instant interior acclamation and joy and revelation and delight, but only after prolonged and judicious study. It was evident to his pedestrian mind that the crucified Nazarene was the Messiah. But how he, a discreet and cautious man, who took much time to reach even an insignificant conviction, had arrived at his belief was not known even to his wife. I believe, he had told her with his usual gravity. Excuse me, that was sufficient. He was willing to grant that less blessed men did not believe, and he pitied them. He had noticed recently that many of his fellow Jews were entering Damascus from the provinces of Israel with stories of persecutions inflicted on them by the high priest Caiaphas and Pontius Pilate, because they were adherents of the new cult. He assisted them with his usual quiet prudence, and in secrecy, not out of fear, for he lacked the imagination to fear much, but out of charity. This too will pass, he said, quoting Solomon. A man needed only to have patience. When some mentioned Saul bin Hillel as one of the most ferocious persecutors, he was mildly incredulous, and he welcomed the visit of the young man, for he liked visitors and gossip. And he respected Shabuah ben Abraham, who had been of service to him in the past. 2 days before Saul had arrived at his large walled house on the street called Straight, he had heard the full story, and for the first time in his ordered life, he knew acute distress. Then it came to him that God, blessed be his name, had arranged this in order that he, Judas ben Jonah, could bring the young man to reason and deflect him from his transient ways. As a man of goodwill himself, he was convinced that most men had instincts of goodwill. It was only necessary to inspire them. Evil was banal and trivial. Good was powerful and invariably triumphant. This was the conviction of Judas ben Jonah, though he did not carry this belief too far in the marketplace, and so enhanced his reputation for austere prudence. The street called Straight was not straight, but was even more winding and serpentine than the other fervid streets of Damascus. However, it had a certain decorum and quietude, for all the houses were the houses of rich men who did not flaunt their wealth. Judas had ordered apartments for Saul, whom he remembered as a pugnacious young man with fiery red hair and impatient eyes, and an abrupt manner, and a man who was not as respectful to his elders as was seemly. He awaited the arrival of Saul as his guest with superbly concealed anxiety and apprehension. But Saul had arrived long after midnight last night, though not expectedly until the morrow, and he had come in blind, mute disarray with Roman soldiers, who had led his horse into the courtyard, and after delivering Saul to his host, had departed to their barracks. They had told Judas, in their blunt and artless military fashion, that Saul had apparently seen a god on the desert, for he had been instantly deprived of sight, and his face had glowed like the moon. Judas observed this himself, and he was filled with the first wild conjectures of his stupid and serene life. Had Saul bin Hillel become mad? Judas ordered servants to conduct Saul to his quarters, and commanded water and scented towels and fine soap to wash away the soil of the desert, an unguents and nourishing supper. Saul, without protest, and seemingly unaware of all that transpired about him, departed with the servants and Judas, and sat down in the atrium to consider the matter. He did not like the unexpected and the strange. He sat and frowned and stroked his beard and ruminated, and turned the fine rings on his plump fingers. He let some time pass, and then went to the chambers he had assigned to Saul, and there he had sat before the young man with his staring blue eyes and the clean, coarse garments in which the servants had dressed him. Judas noticed that the supper had barely been touched. He became uneasy. There was no sign of injury to the eyes opposite him, which hardly blink at the light of the pleasant lamps. Saul appeared wrapped in some vision, some profound meditation, which made him unconscious not only of himself and his surroundings, but of his host. Judas hesitated. It would be dawn soon, and he was weary, and he was a man who believed it almost sinful not to retire to his bed at the usual hour. But he was not only anxious, he was curious. He said in a kind voice, "Are you ill, Saul ben Hillel? And why do you not see?" "I have seen all of life," said Saul. And these were the first words he had uttered. Suddenly his face shone like lightning, and a quickness as of unbearable exultation flashed in his eyes. "But I must wait." He paused. He turned his blind eyes in Judas's direction and said in a less passionate voice, "Forgive me, Judas ben Jonah, for not greeting you and thanking you for your hospitality before this hour. But I am assailed by a celestial revelations and must meditate on them all." A pucker appeared between Judas's big brown eyes. He again considered as if Saul had suddenly become mad. "I have seen the Messiah," said Saul, and his voice thrilled like a trumpet, and he smiled exultantly and pressed his sun-darkened hands convulsively to his breast, as if to restrain a leaping heart. Judas was more confused. Was this Saul ben Hillel, who had been reported to be the most relentless foe of the Nazarene? "When?" he asked with his usual caution. "But a few hours ago," replied Saul, "in the desert before we approached the gates of Damascus." He spoke simply and with a childlike candor, and Judas could not remember such candor in the young man before. "The Messiah?" said Judas, as if reflecting. "I saw him," said Saul, and he stood up and looked about him with great and rapturous smile, though he could not see. "You must believe me, Judas ben Jonah. I saw him, he whom I have been persecuting, and he did not reproach me nor strike me dead. He has given me a mission, and I am filled with revelations which he is bestowing on me moment after moment. He has chosen me, the most base, the most contemptible, the most loathsome, the most worthy of the fires of hell and utter destruction. Why do I not expire at the very thought of such magnanimity? Such mercy, such love? I do not know," murmured Judas, more confused than ever. He had heard of the inspired disciples and apostles of Yeshua ben Joseph, though he had encountered but one of them. Saul was like a red sun, a red lion in this pleasant chamber, with the flickering lamplight, and with the warm wind stirring the damask curtains and bringing into the room a scent of heated stone and flowers. No one more alien to the house of Judas ben Jonah had ever entered here before, and Judas was disturbed by this wildness and vehement joy and unearthly certitude. "Why do you not see them?" said Judas in a reasonable tone, as if attempting to bring matters to a rational level. "God does not strike men blind out of love." Saul paced a few steps and then retraced them. His strange excitement was growing. "I have been blinded in order that I may see fully, for the first time in my existence," he cried. Judas could not comprehend this. It was not sensible. Perhaps, he suggested, in a paternal tone, the sun was too strong on the desert. He glanced at the carved ivory, the ebony bed with its fragrant linen and silken covers. "Rest, Saul ben Hillel, and if your sight is not restored by morning, I will call a physician." Saul's eloquent face expressed his tremendous impatience, and then he controlled himself and smiled with a gentleness Judas found startling. "I have been told that one will come to me within a few days, and he will baptize me, and my sight will be restored, and then I shall embark on the way he has ordained for me. Blessed be his name." It was evident that he believed, and that he was speaking reasonably, and that Judas would understand these plain words without further explanation. "Who will come to you, Saul?" he asked. "A man named Ananias." The impatience was returning to Saul's face. Judas knew Ananias, a poor and saintly scholar who had been instrumental in bringing Judas into the company of the Messiah. Before he could ask Saul how he knew this man, Saul said, "I have been told of him since I was struck blind, and he will come." Judas rose. He said, "Let me conduct you to your bed, dear friend, for you are exhausted and need your rest." For a moment it appeared that Saul would resist, that he did not desire sleep, and that he wished only to sit and to meditate on the ecstatic, incomprehensible thing that had come to him. Then he permitted Judas to lead him to the bed, and he lay down, and Judas covered him. The older man then contemplated the strong, sunburned face and thick red hair on the silken cushion. "Shalom," he said at last, and blew out the lamps and went to his own chamber, his thoughts most chaotic. Though Judas was a banker as well as a merchant, he respected scholarship and wisdom and preferred to be known as a wise man rather than a wealthy one. Therefore he greeted Ananias with grave courtesy when the elderly man came to his door, and welcomed him to his house and ordered refreshments for him. He pretended not to observe the poor clothing of his guest, and the patched leather boots, and the thin meagerness of his cloak and his lean pouch. Ananias had come a long way through the streets on foot, and his pale and slender face and gray beard wore a patina of golden dust threaded with sweat. Yet in spite of his quiet manner and evident weariness, his expression was bright and youthful, and his eyes were the eyes of a boy, lustrous and polished. "This house is honored by your presence, Ananias," said Judas ben Jonah, and himself poured the wine the servant had brought. And as he was a man who appreciated the refinements of life, he was pleased by the golden ewer traced with indu enamel in various colors. But Ananias drank sparingly and with an apparent absence of mind, and there was a troubled line across his forehead. He declined the sweetmeats, though Judas informed him that they had been prepared by the hand of his talented wife. "I have a peculiar mission," said Ananias at last, in the sweetest of voices. "You have a guest, one Saul ben Tarshish." He hesitated. "Judas, we both adore the Messiah. We know he sends us commands which we dare not disobey. For has he not given his blessed life for us? Does he not love us? Do not therefore ask me questions I cannot answer. I have been sent to your guest." "He awaits you," said Judas. "I confess I understand little of this. His words frighten me when he deigns to answer my questions. His manner has about it something of madness. He has sat these 3 days in my house, wrapped in a dream, and he murmurs under his breath and prays without ceasing. And he is as another Jacob, absorbed in visions, or young Moses gazing with blind eyes upon the promised land. Sometimes, though he cannot see, he paces his chamber, uttering great cries and sobs and clapping his hands together. And sometimes he weeps aloud and laughs in exultation as if a teacher had taught him an absorbing lesson and he had come to a mighty conclusion of his own. He does not eat, he drinks little. If he sleeps, I do not know it. He is like one consumed. He appears like one in a fever, restless, transfigured, staring, burning of eye, dry of lip. I have offered to conduct him into my gardens for the sun and the air, and he refuses to leave his chamber. Insistence brings on the fit of terrible impatience, for which he immediately apologizes and begs forgiveness. He has said to me, I must be alone, so that I may learn and observe that what I saw in obscurity and murk, and as through a glass darkly, has been shining in color and light from all eternity, and I am blind. I once said with Job, "Oh, that I might know where to find him. And behold, I was at my right hand, he was at my right hand always, and I did not see him, for I refused to see. But now I see, and cannot have enough of the seeing, and I await his call." Ananias my dogs get quiet, I worry. Ananias looked with compassion on his troubled host and said, "I comprehend his words, Jonas ben Jonah. At first I was dismayed, for is this not Saul of Tarshish, whom the Romans called Paul of Tarsus, the fearful enemy of our people? There is an old Libyan saying that once an eagle stricken with an arrow said, when he saw the fashion of the shaft, 'With our own feathers, not by ours.'" Excuse me. "With our own feathers, not by others." Let me start this paragraph again. I totally got distracted. Sorry. Ananias looked with compassion on his troubled host and said, "I comprehend his words, Judas ben Jonah. At first I was dismayed, for is this not Saul of Tarshish, whom the Romans called Paul of Tarsus, the fearful enemy of our people? There is an old Libyan saying that once an eagle stricken with an arrow said, when he saw the fashion of the shaft, 'With our own feathers, not by others' hand, are we now smitten.' The people of Saul ben Hillel have been smitten by him, but not in malice, not in deliberate cruelty or rage, but in ignorance." No matter the reason for smiting," said Judas, with a wry expression. "The wound is just as painful." "True," said Ananias, rising. "But now I pray you to lead me to your guest." They went in silence to the chamber of Saul. They found him sitting on his rich bed, his hands clasped on his knees, straining to hear. Ananias paused on the threshold to contemplate this man of terror, who had come to destroy the faithful, and who had had a vision on the road to Damascus. He was a young man with hair like the sun at sunset, disheveled and uncombed. His face was ghastly with sleeplessness, yet trembling with exultation, and his eyes, one drooping in affliction, shone with an unusual blue light like metal, and he had the powerful aspect of a young lion held by a chain, and straining and overcome with eagerness for the arena. He leaned forward, craning toward the door, for beyond it he had heard footsteps, and so vivid were his eyes that Ananias could hardly believe that he did not see. The old man said softly, "Shalom. May the joy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob be on you, my son, Saul ben Hillel, and may the peace of God, blessed be his name, attend you always." Saul sprang to his feet. He moved 2 steps in the direction of Ananias. He cried, "Ananias!" "It is I," said Ananias. "I know all that you would tell me, for I, too, have seen a vision." Now for the first time he felt pity for this young man, this passionate man, this most vehement and resolute man, and saw much in an instant of time. He sighed. At the sound, Saul came forward again, wildly smiling, now that there were tears on his darkened cheeks. He fell to his knees before Ananias and clasped his hands and bowed his head. Ananias glanced beseechingly at Judas and the other man, who was agape with curiosity, left the chamber and closed the door behind him. Ananias laid his hands on Saul's rough head and sighed again. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that all Saul's life had been one agonized search in suffering in despair, in occasional rapture, in confusion, in hope, and in yearning. He had found what he had sought, but Ananias knew, with a preternatural knowing, what fate lay before this young man. Saul would not fall aside. He would never falter. He would know pain as he had never known it before, but he would accept it, not merely meekly as quieter and more composed men accepted it, but with furious joy. Yet he had far to go, and the light would not always lie on his path, and he would grope and struggle and fight in a far vaster wilderness than any he had experienced in his short lifetime. He was a warrior, one of God's heroes, and he would not lay down his sword and his armor until his last breath. Ananias raised his head and prayed almost inaudibly that Saul's sight might be restored to him, if it were the will of God, and that God would always comfort and uphold him in the direful way ahead. He bent and pressed his palms against the young man's feverish cheeks and kissed his forehead like a father, and there were tears in his own eyes. No more was he troubled. No more did he remember the letters from the high priest Caiaphas to the leaders of the synagogues in Damascus. Sunlight filled the chamber. A great peace inhabited it, and flowed like bright water over the kneeling man and the old scholar who bent over him so tenderly. Light reflected back from the white marble floor, struck on the walls, and then it returned the hair of Saul to fire. It was like a brilliant aureole about his head. For an instant Ananias knew fear. Yet the breeze from the open windows was soft as silk and scented with fountains and flowers, and there was the shadow of trees wavering in the radiance, and the cry of birds. Saul lifted his head. He smiled up into the face of the old man, and with joy he said, "I see. No more I am blind, but behold the world in the glory as I never saw it before. I see." "Yes, my son," said Ananias. "For the first time in your life, you see. Shalom." And that's the end of chapter 34. Join me shortly for part 3. We'll be going into the apostle to the Gentiles, the new life of Saul, or Paul.